I love hiking and camping and just nature in general, but considering that I wear historical fashion as my everyday dress, I've often thought about historical alternatives to modern hiking and camping equipment. Wool and other natural fibers layered are brilliant ways to stay warm, and I already wear leather minimal sole sandals or leather boots when I hike. But one thing I haven't really found a wonderful alternative to yet is a hiking pack. High quality modern hiking packs are just very comfortable and they distribute the weight evenly. This is my old pack that I've owned for nearly a decade, and there's a story about this pack. When I was 18, I was living in my car and I had literally no money. I was so broke, and I found this pack at the back of a thrift store in the middle of the desert in a big pile of stuff, and I went up to the register to ask how much it was, and they told me $3. I was shocked because this is the exact pack that I had been wanting, and if you search how much it costs, well, it's a lot more than $3. Not to mention the one I found was also in my size. And when I first moved to Europe about a year or two later, this pack came with me and it helped to move my life. So it's sentimental, and I don't know if I'll stop using it, but I am open to trying out some historical alternatives, especially if I want to go on a historical hike and camping trip with some friends. In comes what is known as the Martebo bag. The Martebo bag is probably one of the closest things to a hiking pack during the 14th century. It is named after a carving in Martebo Church in Gotland, Sweden, of a woman carrying one of these bags, and it was my friend Devin that made me aware of its existence. I mentioned her as well in my Iron Age shoes video, which I released recently. Devin is a very inspirational person who has really expanded my world around certain historical aspects. Oh, and she makes beautiful historical clothing and has an amazing shop. This isn't sponsored, I just really love her work. So back to the Martebo bag. Thankfully, figuring out how to construct my own wasn't too challenging due to the very helpful individuals who have recreated them. In particular, these sites were super helpful for researching how to reconstruct a Martebo bag, and I've linked them all in the description box in case you'd like to learn more and maybe make your own after this video. It seems like most of the Martebo bags are constructed with the opening running vertical on the bag when it's laid out, but one of the articles from Black Cat Sews expresses how a horizontal opening is perhaps more suitable due to less tension being put on the seam when carried. This structure is more common with the 18th century market wallet style bags, and this made a lot of sense to me, so I ultimately decided I would make mine more like Black Cat Sews did. Another cool thing about these Martebo bags is not only could they be carried on the shoulder of a person, but they could also be carried by a horse or other pack animal. Martebo bags are very versatile, and this doesn't seem like too complex of a project, so I think with slow hand sewing it will maybe take me a day or two, and then I can show you all the result and how it feels to actually carry one on my shoulder. In reality, this medieval Martebo bag would have probably been used for practical purposes, such as, carrying goods over distances, and not for a leisurely pastime like hiking, but since I don't exactly have goods to carry over distances unless I suddenly wanted a fairly drastic career change, I decided for my uses this bag would be best for a historical hiking trip. In the future though, not right this second. Going for long walks is a tale as old as time, but the history of leisurely hiking is actually quite fascinating. It wasn't really until the Romantics in the 1700s and 1800s that hiking as a fun pastime became a thing, at least in the Western world. There was this Italian poet named Francesco Petrarca, also just known as Petrarch in English, who wrote about his ascent of Mont Ventoux on the 26th of April, 1336. I guess a better way to describe it is, in the Western world, the Romantics mark the point where hiking becomes more of a somewhat popular hobby, and even then, leisurely hiking was still something done by the wealthier members of society, or at least people who were middle class. One of my favorite Romantic-era hikers is actually Dorothy Wordsworth. Dorothy and her friend Mary Barker ascended Scafell Pike in the Lake District in October 1818, which is England's highest mountain. Not to mention, during a time when most people did not ascend that mountain, let alone women. This hike was not just a mountain climb either. The University of Manchester describes it as a rebellious act that opened up mountains and mountaineering for successive generations of women. You might recognize Dorothy's surname, as she is indeed the sister of William Wordsworth. One of the saddest parts that the University of Manchester also mentions is Dorothy Wordsworth's account of the ascent of Scafell was later included, without attribution, in William Wordsworth's Guide to the District of the Lakes. The implication was that it was William who had undertaken the ascent. I'm glad we have the knowledge now that it was actually Dorothy Wordsworth and Mary Barker. And that was far from the only hike Dorothy Wordsworth ever took. She was a prolific walker, and like her brother, she's actually an amazing poet herself. I studied creative writing in university, and when I first read her work, I remember feeling so upset that more people didn't know who she was or her fascinating interests. One of my favorites she's written is called Grasmere, a fragment. In fact, a letter that Dorothy Wordsworth sent to her brother William Wordsworth on April 15, 1802, was the inspiration for William's famous poem mentioning daffodils called I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. Yet the poetry of Dorothy is equally as magnificent in my opinion. And still, she is almost always just referenced in a footnote or as the sister of William. Anytime I get the opportunity to talk about her, I take it, because more people need to know. Well, that went on quite a bit of an info-dumping tangent, so back to the medieval times we go. From what I was reading, medieval people generally avoided sleeping outside if they could. It makes sense, outside isn't always very safe, and it gets cold, and weather can be unpredictable. There are wild animals, and perhaps humans with poor intentions. There are so many unpredictable factors flinging at all angles, so whilst I eventually hope to utilize my Martebo bag for a little hiking, camping trip, the medieval people most likely weren't using theirs for such a joyous occasion. I say probably because the reality is no amount of evidence can speak for 100% of people, and perhaps there was some random medieval person who absolutely loved leisurely camping. The history of camping as a pastime is also pretty interesting. In Britain at least, it wasn't really popular until the 1880s. Thomas Hiram Holding, a traveling tailor, is sometimes seen as the father of modern camping. Hopefully you've learned a new fact or two from this section, and now I'll finally explain how I made the Martebo bag. However, I didn't capture all that much footage because it wasn't actually that interesting. I essentially cut a piece of medium weight linen fabric about 70 by 46 inches, and I folded it so that the selvage edges would meet, except I cut one side of the selvage edge off because I wanted a narrower bag. Then I sewed that seam with a backstitch, being mindful to leave a center opening to have access to my stuff, and then I flat felled the seam so that the fabric wouldn't fray. Finally, I backstitched the two shorter sides, making sure the long seam I made was in the middle, and then I flat felled those seams as well, and that was it. I might add some reinforcement stitching and linen tape at some of the points for the opening edges, but for now it feels plenty strong, so let's try it out. My Martebo bag is complete. It's very long, as you can see. It's inside out still. I thought I would turn it right side out in front of all of you. And I have here in front of me a bunch of vaguely medieval stuff that I found around my house. Now, I don't do medieval reenactments, so I don't really have actual medieval stuff that I would take with me to some reenactment event. So instead I gathered up a little bit of stuff here and there from other projects to basically pack this bag with. Things that maybe perhaps a medieval person would take on the road with them if they had to hike for a little while or walk somewhere. Alright, so I'm gonna turn this inside out. The edges are always the hardest. That's good enough. Here it is, and you can see the opening right there. Beautiful. So now I'm gonna start to basically pack everything into this opening. One item at a time, and I'm gonna try and load them up so that it's even on both sides. That way the weight is more evenly distributed. First thing on my list is a cloak, and it's a bit moth-eaten, which is pretty historically accurate. All right, I'm gonna roll this up. You can see the moth holes there. One thing I can see being kind of annoying with this bag is the fact that getting stuff out would probably not be the easiest, but you know, it's the same with hiking packs, too, modern ones, because if you put something that you need at the bottom of your pack, it's really annoying to get it all out. You have to unpack everything and repack everything. Whenever I would be hiking or needing my pack during the time I lived in my car, it was a lot like that. It was very annoying. Okay, one item. As you can see, it's got barely anything in it already, but yeah, I think it's doing well. Next on the list is 2 wool blankets for warmth. And I'm actually going to wrap up my eating stuff with the blanket, that way it's not bobbing around in there, and just thought that might be a clever way to deal with it. So that's there. And I'm going to pack this one onto the other side because that way the weight is a bit more even. Then it is an extra wool dress, in case I get cold, or if, say, the rain comes and my kirtle gets ruined, I need an extra dress just in case. People didn't really have a lot of clothes. They tended to just have a couple of garments that they wore, and they would wear these until they were in shreds and patch them up a bunch as well, and then even use the shreds for something else, because fabric was extremely expensive and it was a very precious resource. I actually have a little bit of a system going. So on this side I'm placing clothes, and on this side I'm placing sleeping stuff and eating stuff. And I think that this is actually a really nice way to organize it, because then I know what's what, an extra shift, since this is considered historical underwear and they always tell you to pack more than one pair of underwear. So I'm wearing one and here's a second. It's going to be on the clothing side. Then I've got a pair of stockings which do not match because I grabbed the wrong ones. They're slightly different. These are wool knitted stockings, which I would say that wool hose would have been more appropriate for the medieval time. Knitted stockings are later on. I don't own a pair of wool hose because I haven't made a pair yet. So this is the next best thing it'll have to do. Finally, I've got a leather belt, just in case. Also works, I guess, as a tourniquet if things go wrong. That is my bag, all packed up. Now, I think one thing that could be really good is to actually take some twine or string and be able to tie these closed. Let's try it out. How does it look? Do I look medieval? I think I look pretty cute. I kind of feel like Santa or something, a little bit, which is appropriate for the season. It's like a medieval Santa walking around. All right, let me move this table, and we can walk around a little bit. Well, here is my Martebo bag. Beautiful, right? It's actually really comfortable. I am impressed. I actually can barely feel it on my shoulder. It feels really evenly distributed. And I could imagine myself walking with this for quite a distance. Now today I will not be trying this out in nature. That's gonna be for another day and another video, because I have some ideas for hiking historical type videos in the future, but I want to do them properly, so I don't want to rush this video and try and do kind of a half-assed camping trip. I would much rather see if it actually works for an extended hike or a longer duration of time. But just right now, this is really comfortable, and this is more or less everything that a medieval person might need. Of course, they would need some food as well and something for their water. Very, very impressed. And I feel like as well, if I was feeling like it, I could probably even try putting it like this on my body as well. Oh, that's really comfortable. Impressive. I'm gonna try this when I do the actual hiking. That feels really nicely distributed. It reminds me of how I used to carry water as a kid in my grandma's village. We'd have a stick and 2 buckets, and this is a very similar sort of idea. And if my shoulders started getting tired, I could just grab these and walk around like this. Wow, this is just comfortable. I can just like lounge around. It feels like I'm just kicking back on a big chair, resting, taking a little nap. If you would like to support more projects like this one, then for just £3 a month, you can become a patron on my Patreon. I offer a monthly exclusive post, as well as posting my sewing projects ahead of time before anyone else gets to see them, and just other fun behind the scenes announcements, also sometimes polls, so you have some voting power. My goal is to get to 150 patrons, that way I don't have to rely as much financially on this platform. If you'd like to see me eat only medieval food for an entire week, then be sure to watch this video next. Thank you so much for watching, and see you all in 2 weeks for another video.